morning. Welcome to another fine Montana day. And thanks for revisiting the electric bison. Behind me is St. Helena's Cathedral, which was pretty much paid for by a single Irishman who didn't know how to read and write, Thomas Cruise, who found the fabulously wealthy Drumlummen mine up in Marysville, Montana. He had named the Drumlummen mine after this county back in Ireland. Yep, he's the same one that paid for the state capitol that we told you about several episodes ago. He wasn't one of those Irishmen that went out and blew his money on drink and other things. So we have this fine cathedral in which he was the first to be buried. Isn't that interesting? I'm here because we're going to be talking about the Battle of Monterrey, Mexico, when our invading U.S. Army attacked the defending Mexican soldiers, and the outcome was basically a defensive victory for the Mexicans. They walked off with all their weapons. There was an armistice negotiated because the American forces were so exhausted. But you'll notice in the discussion of that battle that'll come next that the Black Fort that caused so much trouble caused all the elements of Taylor's invading army to have to disperse and come in unusual directions to Monterrey. Was filled with cannons manned by San Patricio deserters. At least that's what it was billed as. They were deserters. They were probably Irishmen. And those in this summary, the number used was 49. But whatever that number was, it was the first time that the invading U.S. Army realized that some of the soldiers who had deserted were actually going to fight against them and fight well. And then when the time came for the truce, and the Mexican army was permitted to march west out of Monterrey towards Saltillo in the next battle, which was going to be Buena Vista, the cannons that were negotiated to be allowed to leave were the ones manned by the San Patricios. And so there's a number of private soldiers' memoirs that talk about watching the Mexican army march out of town. It's kind of like a parade, and seeing their own fellow soldiers who had deserted riding the Mexican cannons as part of the Mexican army. So that's a big deal. That's where the San Patricios for sure were present. And I want to talk about that for a few minutes. The war with Mexico was during the Manifest Destiny period of our country. And a lot of that manifest destiny was about just basically rolling over other people, whether they be part Indian, Mexicans, mestizos, and certainly people of other religions. So during the war, the battle in Monterrey, American officers on their horses actually rode into that cathedral at Monterrey. And there was a lot of fun made of Catholics. Not to say that the Irishmen were all good practicing Catholics. That's never going to happen, like Tom Cruise was. But they were familiar with the Catholic culture, and the Catholic culture is very prevalent in Mexico, except for Monterrey. Monterrey is considered kind of a non-Catholic area. But still, they had their cathedral, and they had, I'm sure, their share of Catholic soldiers and citizens. And so that whole attitude toward Catholics that prevailed in the American army, it really put off a lot of the Irish soldiers. The thing is, there were a lot of desertions during that war for other reasons. Remember, it was a war that the president, Polk, wanted to have so he could get slavery in the states that would then be made from the northern part of Mexico. And so not everybody was enamored by slavery either, didn't want to be there. So of the 26,900, almost 27,000 regular soldiers in the invading army, 2,900 deserted. And of the 59,000 volunteer soldiers that joined up to help invade Mexico, of the 59,000, 3,900 deserted. It was easier for the volunteers to desert, and it wasn't such an onerous duty as it was with the regulars. The thing about it is, all those people that deserted, whether they deserted from the regular army to be in a volunteer unit, or to just go and be in a Mexican army unit and further their military career, or just get out of it, just get out of the situation that they were in. A lot of the people that deserted ended up farther south in Mexico City, and were in the organized San Patricios. And the numbers of the organized San Patricios vary from 250 up to 700, I think, certainly 500. But the thing about them is that their numbers swelled later because all those who deserted that were banging around Mexico didn't get treated very well unless they said they were San Patricios. So you had a lot of people, they were drunks, they had their hands out, they were just trying to stay alive in a foreign country after deserting from the American volunteers or the American regulars that would get a little bit more better treatment by calling themselves former San Patricios, which was a matter of great honor in Mexico after the battles around Mexico City. If you read Cormac McCarthy, the Irish-American author, read some of his books, try to read Blood Meridian. And in those scenes, those long sentences that he writes, those scenes of combat in the northern deserts of Mexico, you'll see that he includes Colorados, Red Legs, Norte Americanos that, the sun turned their legs red. And that was another name for the San Patricios. And a lot of them showed up out on the Pacific coast, or at least people who called themselves San Patricios. So Monterrey's where they first showed up for real. John Riley, who was the leader of the artillery unit, who had learned the trade up in the British Army in Canada before he came down to the States, when he left and crossed the Rio Grande to go to Mass on Easter 1846, he was practicing his religion. But when the Americans, soldiers under Harney, hung 50 of the San Patricios who were captured after the Battle of Churubusco, the church authorities in Mexico went up and down the line of the men that as they sat and stood in the artillery wagons, two at a time, waiting for the Battle of Chapultepec to end and the American flag to go up, which would be the signal for them to be hung. And so they asked each one of those 50 men if they wanted to have last rites and be buried in sacred ground, Catholic ground. Only 13 of them said they were interested. So there was a lot more going on with the San Patricios than just religion. The religion was important, but not only that, it was the attitude toward people with a different point of view and a different way of life. And the Americans who invaded Mexico, they didn't do a very good job of showing that they were informed or intelligent about those sorts of things. And it's unfortunate, but some say the war with Mexico is continuing because some of those attitudes are still endemic in our society toward race and religion. It's very unfortunate. It's stupid, really. So, thanks for visiting the Electric Bison. We'll talk to you later.